wrong. Okay? Alright, this is our prayer that we say. It's from the Ari before we learn Kabbalah. And although we're not going to be learning, from the actual text, well, we're going to be learning from translated texts today, I still think it's worth learning, saying the prayer. ריבון העולמים ואדוני אדונים, אב רחמן וסליחות, מודים אנחנו לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ולאבותינו, בקידה ובהשתחוויה, שקרבתנו לתורתך ולעבודתך עבודת הקודש, ונתת לנו חלק בסודות תורתך הקדושה, מה אנו ומחיינו, אשר עשית עמנו חסד גדול כזה. על כן אנחנו מפילים תחנוננו לפניך, שתמחור ותסלח לכל חטאותינו ועוונותינו, ועל יהיו עוונותינו מבדילים בינינו לבינך, וכן יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ולאבותינו, שתכונן לבבינו ליראתך ולבבך. תקשיב אוזניך לדברינו אלה, ותפתח לבבינו הערל בסודות תורתך, ויהיה לימודנו זה נחת רוח, לפני כיסא כבודך כרך ניחוח. ותציל עלינו אור מקור נשמתנו בכל בחינתנו, שיתנוצצו ניצוצות עבודיך הקדושים, אשר על ידם גילית דבריך אלה בעולם, וזכותם, וזכות אבותם, וזכות תורתם ותמימותם וקדושתם, יעמוד לנו לבן לקשר בדברים אלו. ובזכותם תהיה עינינו במה שאנו לומדים, כמאמר נעים זמירות ישראל, גל עיני והביט הנפלאות מתורתך, כי אדוני תן חוכמה מפיו, דעת ותבונה, יהיו לו רצונים מפי, ויגון ליבי לפניך, אדוני צורי וגואלי. Amen. כן יהי רצון. Master of the universe and Lord of lords, Father of mercy and forgiveness, we give thanks before you, O Lord our God and God of our fathers, bowing their head and prostrating ourselves, that you've brought us close to your Torah and to your service, the holiest of services, and you've given to us a portion of the inner meanings of your holy Torah. What are we and what is our life, that you've dealt with us such a great loving kindness as this? Therefore we lay our supplication before you, that you pardon and forgive all our sins and iniquities, and do not let our iniquities separate us from you. May it be your will, O Lord our God and God of our fathers, that you prepare our hearts to have reverence of you and love of you, and may your ears listen to these our words. Open our uncircumcised heart in the inner meanings of your Torah, and may this our learning give pleasure before the throne of your glory as a sweet-smelling fragrance. Bestow upon us the light of the source of our soul in all its aspects, and may the sparks of your holy servant shine forth, through whom you revealed these your words into the world. And may their merit and the merit of their fathers, the merit of their Torah, their wholeness and holiness stand by us, that we do not stumble in these words. And through their merit enlighten our eyes on what we are learning, as the sweet singer of Israel said, open my eyes and I will look on the wonders of your Torah, for the Lord gives wisdom from his mouth, knowledge and understanding. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable before you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share, and I saw somebody said something on the chat. What is the name of that beautiful prayer? Oh, right, it is, I found it on the internet, in fact, but it's a real prayer. It's composed by the Ari, and it's a prayer that you say before you learn Kabbalah. And if you want to contact me via my website, I'll send you my website, www.nahorapress.com. There we go. Or you can also give you my email. I'll send you a copy of it. Alright, so anybody can contact me. Alright, and I'll be delighted. I've written out a translation, so you can have a translation. Oh, you're very welcome. Alright then, now let's go back to share screen, and what I want to, here, this one, that's the one we want, share. Okay, now I started to think a lot in terms of Kabbalah, about Kabbalah and our present crisis. All right, and I wrote for myself an article putting in the ideas of Kabbalah, and I want to discuss the article with you. All right, you can, when you want to say something, you can unmute your mic if you want, and call out, ask questions, say what you think. I'm very happy to have this as a free-flowing discussion with its focus on the learning of Kabbalah. All right? So this is what I wrote, and you can tell me what you think. Kabbalah and our present crisis. Our world, both politically and culturally, is in turmoil. Our value systems are being turned upside down. Freedom of speech in the West is no longer guaranteed. Our economic systems serve only a few, with the majority suffering under huge burdens. And in more than one country, democracy itself and the freedom of the individual are under attack. Now, actually, when we look at it, all this was true before. But now added to that is the coronavirus crisis and the latest riots in the United States and in the world. Where are we heading? Times of chaos are definitely uncomfortable for us. And we're the individuals who've been destined to live through them. But such times also provide opportunities for us to reassess our values and to make new decisions in the directions that we, as individuals, as families, and as communities, want to go in. In order to understand how we got to where we got, we need to understand what our present political and economic systems are based on. Our present political and economic systems are based on our basic nature. So in order to ask the questions we need to ask about how and why these systems are no longer serving us, we first of all need to understand what our basic nature is. The wisdom of the Kabbalah teaches us that our basic nature is that of the desire to receive pleasure. All created beings share this nature, but of course it's the most developed in the human being. It's a nature that comes to us embedded right from the very thought of creation. Indeed, this is as Rabbi Yehuda Rav Ashlag states clearly in his work, the Pticha L'Chochmat Kabbalah. Our sages taught that the purpose of creation is that God wants to give pleasure to the created beings. According to the gift of his ample hand, may the one be blessed. And as a consequence, there was imprinted in the souls a will and great desire to receive God's plenty. Both the bounty itself and the desire to receive it come from the Creator. And they both stem necessarily from the thought of creation. However, we distinguish them, that the bounty, God's light, comes from his essence, whereas the will to receive is the root of all created beings. And it's from this very beginning that we can see what our basic nature consists of. So our basic nature is a desire to receive pleasure. Okay? Anybody got any problems or questions, or everybody okay so far? All right. Call out if there's an issue, or you can put it in the chat or something. It's from this very thought of creation that all creation unfolds. In actual fact, the creation takes place as two parallel processes. On the one hand, Hu Amar V'yehi, God spoke, and it was finished. The moment he thought the process of thought of creation, it was completely done. The Creator not requiring process as we do. It says in the Zohar, at the time when the Holy Blessed One wanted to create the world, his will arose before him and portrayed all the future souls that were to be given subsequently to humankind. All of them were portrayed before him in the actual form that they would finally attain in the children of Adam. And he saw each and every one. So, the process of creation is not yet finished. We have not yet finished the ideal society, the society where a society based on love and compassion, where everybody's needs are met. We haven't reached that at all, okay? We're a society of happiness. We haven't reached there. But in the Ein Sof, in the infinite, it's already present. That's amazing. That is an amazing thought. That in one sense, the creation is already finished in all its glorious perfection. All the souls, all their happenings came forth and were finished, completed, before the Creator in all their beauty and wholeness. Now, this is not just theory. This fact is a real and present cause for hope and trust in the future. Our destiny of reaching the wholeness and beauty of a civilization based on compassion and love in conscious connection with the Creator has inevitably to come about because it is in fact already here, even though we cannot in our normal conscious state access it. The Shabbat that we celebrate every week belongs to that finished state and partakes something of its essence. The only question really is, when will such a transformed state, such an idyllic state, be present to us in our everyday consciousness? And the answer to that question depends on the other process with which the creation unfolds. As a parallel process, the creation also consists of a gradual unfolding from the higher spiritual worlds, higher spiritual consciousnesses, to the lower worlds, which culminate in the creation of the human being. It is this second principle, the unfolding of creation, which is our concern. This is the process that we are participants in. Uncomfortable though such participation may feel to us, it does have a high purpose, which is to give the human being the unsurpassed joy of becoming partners with God, earning the joy that he wishes to give us, rather than simply being passive receivers of his goodness. It is through the second process of the unfolding of creation from the higher worlds of consciousness to the lower worlds, and our subsequent rectification of our basic nature, that allows us once more to reascend the spiritual worlds. It is a process in which as human beings take an active role in bringing about, in reality and in full consciousness, the sublime perfection that is already waiting and present in the Ein Sof, in the infinite. All right? Just want to stop there a second, just check if there's any chats. No, everybody okay? All right. So far, so good then. So what we see is there's tremendous cause for hope. The world, whether we are aware of it or not, is coming to its perfection. We can see many signs of that, in fact. The fact that the Kabbalah, which was hidden for centuries, is now openly available to everybody, is one of the main signs of redemption coming close. Another sign is actually the change in the status of women. This is actually a sign of the coming redemption. Why is women's status changing in the physical reality? It's because it's changing in the spiritual reality. Okay? I'm not saying, I learnt this week actually, from Rabbi Gottlieb, who's one of the great teachers of Kabbalah in the country, in Israel. He teaches the work of Rav Ashlag to an amazing extent, but it's all in Hebrew, so one day his work will all get translated. But anyhow, he taught this week that are basically three states in the spiritual worlds of the feminine. One state is like it's a sort of at a much lower level than the male, like like if you want the Sfirot terms, then the Malchut is only a point source compared with the Zer Anpin, okay, in the terms of the Sfirot. There is another state where they are of equal light, like the sun and the moon being of equal size and brightness, but that's not a very balanced state. That's what we've got right now in the world, which is a rather aggressive feminism, not necessarily the balanced state. The third state is one which hopefully we'll get to, which is when the rightful relationship of both male and female are balanced and each has complete satisfaction. Okay? So we actually, in mutual cooperation and complete satisfaction, that's called zivug, in interaction face to face. And that's the ideal, and I think that we're getting closer to that. We can certainly see the change in the consciousness of how we relate to women. So we can see that there's two major changes that we can see. First was the opening of Kabbalah, very broadly. And the second thing, and more, by the way, all the time. And secondly is a change in the relationship with women in society. And I'm sure that you will be able to find other pointers as well to the fact that we are, in fact, getting closer to the redemption, even though it might not look like it on the surface. All right. So it's through this second process of the unfolding of creation from the higher worlds of consciousness to the lower worlds, and then our subsequent correction, our subsequent transformation of our basic nature, which, as we said, was the will to receive for ourselves alone. If we are able to transform it so that we are no longer just concerned with our own selves, but start to redirect it in goodness and giving to the other, whether we're talking about our fellow human being, or whether we're talking about the fellow creatures on the planet, or whether we're talking about God and relating to God and giving to God unconditionally in just the way He gives to us, then this allows us to once more reascend up the spiritual world and reascend in consciousness. And it's a process in which we as human beings take an active role in bringing about, in reality and in full consciousness, the sublime perfection that is already waiting and present in the Ein Sof, in the infinite. In order to carry out our role, the human being was created with two opposite parameters within each individual. All the other created beings are either in the framework of holiness or in the framework of evil. Okay, they're either one or the other. But we as human beings have within us the capacity to align with either the framework of holiness or the framework of evil. What's the framework of holiness? The framework of holiness is one in which we are in affinity of form with the Creator. Just as the Creator is good and kind and giving and compassionate, so when we are doing the similar type of thing, feeding the sick, caring for the homeless, okay, then we are in the framework of holiness. Or we can also align with the framework of evil. We have both within us. And what's the framework of evil? When we separate from the Creator, He's all giving and we just receiving for ourselves alone. That's considered the framework of evil. Okay? Now, we've got that capacity to align with either the framework of holiness or the framework of evil because we've got within ourselves representatives of both. What are these called? The soul and the body. We've got both aspects within us. Both aspects originate in the thought of creation, as we saw in that excerpt we read earlier, and both, in fact, are aspects of the will to receive, but they travel down to us through very different pathways. The body embodies the will to receive, whereas the soul embodies the will to give unconditionally. In the Kabbalah, the term the body does not refer to our physical body alone, but it's much more what we would term the ego. The ego is composed of physical, emotional, and mental components, all of which have desires to receive pleasure. The will to receive pleasure, as we said earlier, is a necessary and important part of our makeup. It is our created aspect. It gives us our vitality, it gives us our hope, it gives us our life force and our motivation. It inspires us to grow, to inquire into all realms, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. It leads us to open businesses, go into research, into technology, build families. It is the tool with which we can receive all of God's goodness. However, when used in its primal state, in its original form, our will to receive pleasure causes us to separate from God instead of connecting us with him. This follows from an early event in the evolution of the worlds called the Tzimtzum. Okay? You might have heard that term. The Tzimtzum was a type of contraction which left a space for the unfolding of the worlds. Okay? From the moment of Tzimtzum, then the process of the rectification of creation, the tikkun of creation, became possible. What does that involve? It means transforming that direction of using our will to receive to use it in order to give instead of just receive. It's from this point on that we as created beings, in fact, may only use our will to receive for the sake of giving pleasure to our fellow or to the Creator, if we want to stay united with the Creator, if we want to stay in the framework of holiness. If we don't, we end up in the framework of evil. What does this involve? This means that we need to change the direction with which we receive pleasure. No longer using our will to pleasure ourselves, but our primary focus needs to be giving unconditionally to our fellow or to the Creator. All right. As we're born into the world, our ego body appears in its infancy. This ego body grows and develops its desire for self-gratification, finding ever more ways of enhancing our selfish love. It is this ego body in its untransformed modality which at present is forming the basis of our political and economic systems. Our political and economic systems, and this is all over the world, okay, are founded on the desires of power, for money, for appreciation. They're founded on desires for honor and recognition. All of these are untransformed wills to receive for ourselves alone. And these untransformed wills to receive for ourselves alone have got much worse over the last decades. Okay? In the modern age, fueled by the networks of global communication and the uncontrolled rise in consumerism and materialism, these desires have become monsters controlling us. Although we are enticed by them, we become enslaved by them. They fail us because our political systems, our economic systems fail us, because these desires in their untransformed state separate us from the Creator. Our basic nature, as we've seen, comes to us from the Creator. He gave it to us. So, he's good, he's kind. What did he give us such a difficult thing? We can certainly ask, why should its use, the use that he gave of our basic nature, why should its use separate us from the Creator? To answer this, we need to know that just as there are natural laws that govern reality, so there are also spiritual laws that also govern our reality. These laws are as important for our well-being as individuals, as families and societies, as are the physical laws of gravity. As the spiritual laws are just as important. Failure to keep the spiritual laws results in chaos, widespread poverty, destitution, ecological degradation, violence, murder and war, and I am not exaggerating. It is the failure to keep the spiritual laws that are the direct causes of everything that we are seeing today. Let's have a look for a minute. Coronavirus, okay? Was it just accident? There is almost now incontrovertible evidence that coronavirus as we know it was an escape from a laboratory in China. What is a laboratory anywhere, all right, doing, manipulating the genetic code without a discussion of the ethics involved? I'm not saying that technology is wrong. I'm not saying that research is wrong. I am saying that to do it divorced from ethical considerations is definitely wrong. The thirst for knowledge is one of the greatest wills to receive for ourselves alone that humanity has. It's taken us to the brink of self-destruction more than once. The thirst for knowledge took us into the nuclear age. And we're not out of it yet. I mean, there was that accident in Japan, not so long ago. And as far as I understand, they're still pouring radioactive water out into the Pacific. Ethics needs to be the basis of our search of technology, not a side issue if it's even talked about at all. Failure to look at these issues are resulting inevitable consequences of sickness, chaos, widespread poverty and destitution. This is something that the sages have known and talked about from the days of the Talmud. It's not a new idea, okay? However, when things happen in our own times, it's incumbent upon us to have a new look and realize what the causes are of what's happening. There are spiritual laws. Thou shalt not murder is a spiritual law. Thou shalt not steal is a spiritual law. They're part of the 10 Commandments. These are spiritual laws. Okay? If we don't keep our spiritual laws, we get consequences. They are just as important as the physical laws are. Now, the physical laws of nature are accepted by everybody because we can see them for ourselves. If you throw a ball in the air, it comes down. As children, we learn these laws experientially. We learn them as toddlers, okay? When we learn to walk, we discover what the spiritual laws are. The physical laws. They're obvious. You can go further. Scientists investigate further into physical laws using complex instruments of research. But qualitatively, there's no real difference in the discoveries of the child or of the scientist. They are all investigation within the physical realm. As children, we also learn more emotional laws, subtle laws. For example, laws of human behaviour. If you insult somebody, he's liable to get angry with you. These are things we learn in kindergarten. These laws of the way things behave are clear and obvious to us because they form part of our physical experience. The spiritual worlds also function through laws which are just as clear and just as important as the law of gravity is in the natural world. But these spiritual laws are harder for us to understand or to perceive because our experience of them is not always clear to us. We find it hard to see how they operate in practical ways, and we do not understand in advance what the consequences of our actions will of necessity be. Why is that? There's different reasons for this. First of all, these laws do not operate instantly. So unless we make a specific effort to do so, it does not follow that we learn them by experience. What do we mean they don't operate instantly? What happens is, if we transgress a spiritual law, God has patience with us. We don't, he doesn't strike us down with bolts of lightning when we do very negative stuff. If he did strike people down with bolts of lightning, we'd get it, we'd get the consequences. But he doesn't do that. He waits for people to discover for themselves. He waits for people to do tshuva, to make reparation, to say they're sorry, to regret. God understands that we're frail and that we have human frailties and that we make mistakes. So he doesn't send us the consequences straight away, but he allows us time in order to understand and to change direction. The downside of that is because we don't experience an instant response, we tend to carry on making the same mistakes unless we do some introspection and figure it out. The other way we discover it is through the Torah. The Torah shows us our mistakes. When individuals' mistakes or their decisions to use their will to receive for ourselves alone behave synergistically with each other, we get patterns of detrimental behaviour in society as a whole. Now, why does this function? Because it functions with one of the ideas that we've looked at several times in these meetings, and that is the idea that the human being is not separate. We are all actually one soul. We are all part of the soul of Adam. So our behaviour actually affects every single other person on the planet. Obviously, it affects primarily those who are closest to us, but ultimately we all affect each other. So when we're doing good deeds, also we affect each other in a positive way. When we're doing negative stuff, we affect each other in a detrimental way. And that's why we get these sort of monster systems of the politics and economics, which just seem so huge that we have no idea how we're ever going to cope with them. All right? Because what happens is the evil one individual can do becomes multiplied very many times over when there's a lot of similar behavior going on. By looking at practical outcomes of actions and ideas, philosophers throughout the ages have tried to formulate these spiritual laws by looking at the consequences of the mistakes made by both the individual and by society, and have tried to derive understandings that would help us progress in the future. This system of ethics derives its understandings by analysing the perceived causes of suffering in the world. But this way is very slow and cumbersome. There is, however, another way, and that is through the Torah, the divine wisdom. This is the natural spiritual law that was given to the world directly by the Creator through the medium of the people of Israel. It came through the people of Israel who stood together at Mount Sinai and received the Torah straight from the Creator. But its treasure and wisdom belong to all humanity. This is how Rav Ashlag describes these two methods of progress, that of the ethics and that of the Torah, in his seminal essay Matan Torah. Know that there are two forces given to us from above that push us to climb up and ascend the rungs of the spiritual ladder until we reach the heavenly top that is our destination, namely our similarity of form with our Creator. May the one be blessed. The first of these forces pushes us without our intent, which is to say without our personal choice. This force pushes us from behind. We've defined it as the way of suffering or the way of nature. From it stems the philosophy of moral conduct that is called ethics, and this is based on experiential knowledge acquired by critical analysis of situations that arise in practice. In essence, this ethical law is a summary of the damage that's become obvious to us, and this is caused by the core of egoism within us. These experiences, on the surface, come to us seemingly by chance, without intending them or choosing them, but they are very clear in their purpose, because the character that evil takes becomes clearer to our senses. According to the measure that we recognize the damage that the evil causes, we start to remove ourselves from it, and thus arrive at a higher rung on the ladder. The second force pulls us consciously, that is through the power of our own choice. This force pulls us forward from ahead. We've designated this force as being the path of Torah and mitzvot for the sake of giving benefit. For through the practice of the mitzvot, the commands of the Torah, and the work of giving satisfaction to the Creator, we find that there develops within us with marvelous rapidity the same sense of recognition of the evil. We profit in this way in two ways. Firstly, we don't have to wait for the vicissitudes of life, the coronavirus and the chaos and God knows what else, to push us from behind. For the incentive they give rise to is measured only by the amount of pain and destruction they cause us. And this comes about through the presence of the evil within us. But through the path of service to God, the same recognition of the evil within us develops, but without any prior suffering or destruction. On the contrary, through the pleasantness and refinement that we feel at the time of our pure service to God, which we only do in order to give Him satisfaction, there develops within us a relative ability to recognize the baseness of the sparks of light that we gain through selfish love, which hinder us on our journey towards receiving this refined taste of serving God unconditionally. This gradual sense of the recognition of our evil increases and develops within us through periods of delight and great tranquility that we receive periodically as a result of our service to God, and from our experiencing the pleasantness and refinement that come to us consequent on our affinity of form with the Creator. Secondly, we save time. This process functions with our intent. We have it within our ability to increase our practice of Torah and mitzvot, and so hurry up the time our healing takes as much as we wish. So we don't have to go the way of suffering. We don't have to have visitations of evil. We don't have to have plagues and coronavirus and shutdown. We don't have to have riots and chaos and murders. We don't have to have any of these things. We can choose to go a conscious way, the way of Torah and mitzvot. It's definitely our choice. The great body of wisdom that contains within it these spiritual laws is the Torah. As the Talmud states, I created the evil inclination, which we described above as the will to receive for ourselves alone. Okay, I like Rabbi Ashlag's description because it's descriptive. It tells us what it is. I created the Torah as its healing medicine. God did not create the human being with his will to receive for himself alone, or her will to receive for herself alone, and leave us to stumble around trying to discover the spiritual laws through trial and error, a process which we've seen is costly in time and suffering. But he gave us the divine wisdom through the Torah. This is the body of laws that gives us sane and wise rules that redirect us so that we can realign our desires. Just following the rules, just following, we would have had such a different experience over these last while, you know. But in fact, honestly and truthfully, in my view, the suffering from the political and economic systems that we've had has been going on a long time. It's been going on a long time. A long time. Coronavirus is a wake-up call. Coronavirus is not a punishment. Coronavirus, we could say, is a great thing with all the suffering involved. Because only when sometimes we're bonked over the head with reality does humanity tend to wake up. It's certainly a great wake-up call. We said earlier that human being is composed not just of the ego body, but also of the soul. This is our godly nature. In general, we are not normally very cognizant of our soul. We're very unaware of it. We're very unaware of its desires. We're very unaware of its aspirations. But it is, in fact, the God within us. We have the essence of God within us. Why don't we know about it? It's the most important part of ourselves that we have. And we don't know about it because we're not acting in a way that helps us align to it. However, the soul has a natural alignment with the Torah, which is the body of divinely given spiritual law and divine wisdom. As the Zohar teaches, the Torah, the Holy Blessed One, and the soul are all one essence. If we don't know our soul, we can at least know the Torah, and that will open us to our soul. We discover that the Torah is both a way and a destination. First of all, it is a way. When we keep the basic laws of the Torah, we naturally align with the divine purpose. We become more aware of the needs and desires of the soul, and this helps us restrain the egoistical side of our nature. We become more aligned with the real purpose of the human being's sojourn on this planet. We live lives that work better. Our relationships improve. Our happiness is more permanent. Our societies become less polarized and more just. We strive for economic equality and preservation of the environment. And we become cognizant of the divine origin of all human beings. Rav Ashlag writes, "It is known that the purpose of all our work in Torah and mitzvot is to come to dveikut with God, may be blessed, according to the scripture. But surely keep all this commandment that I am commanding you to do, to love the Lord your God in all his ways, and be in dveikut with him, unity with him." But what does dveikut with unity with God mean? How can we unite with God when the scripture affirms, "For the Lord your God is a consuming fire"? The sages of the Talmud interpreted the injunction to unite with him as meaning, unite with his virtues. Just as he is merciful and gracious, so you be merciful and gracious. What are God's virtues? Caught up as we are in the suffering brought about by our own unbridled use of the will to receive ourselves, we find it hard to see God's goodness sometimes. It takes belief to think that God is good and does good, that he gives his goodness to us unconditionally. But that's where we need to begin. If we begin by thinking and acting as if we thought it was true, that God is good and does good, and that we need to act in a similar way for others, we soon discover through our own experience that it is true, that God is good and does good, and we can find it in our own experience. I'm not talking about reading in a book or some sort of philosophy. I'm telling you that we find it within our own lives. Each individual looks into his own life and we discover the goodness of God. Only by setting aside our inbuilt egoism and focusing on giving unconditionally to each other and to God do we come to unity with him. And then these words of the 2nd century sage Rabbi Meir will become as real to us as they were to him. This is one of my favourite bits, by the way. It's from Pirkei Avot. It's the first piece in the last chapter. Whoever occupies himself or herself with Torah for its own sake will merit many things. Not only that, but the whole world becomes worthwhile for them. Here it's he and she, okay? But it's a little tricky to just keep saying both. So just understand it's he and she. He's called friend, beloved, lover of the one, a lover of all people, one who gives joy to God, one who gives joy to people. He's clothed in humility and in reverence of the Creator. He's fitted to be a tzaddik or a tzaddikah, a pious one, upright and faithful, keeping his or her fellow far from sin and bringing his fellow closer to the Creator. Others rejoice in his counsel and in his wisdom, in his understanding and his fortitude. As just said, I have counsel and wisdom, I am understanding, I have fortitude. Sovereignty is given to him, governance and resource in judgment. The secrets of the Torah are revealed to him, and he becomes like an ever-flowing spring, like a river that does not cease. He's modest and long-suffering, forgiving those who insult him, and he's great and exalted over all God's created beings. Just let's ask ourselves a question. What would the world look like if its leaders conformed to that description? To be frank, right now it seems like an unimaginable dream. But it's not beyond possibility. It depends on each and every one of us working to deal with our own consciousness. If each one of us works to let go of our own self-gratification and instead places our focus on the reality and desires of the soul, the God within each one of us, this acts to change the overall consciousness of society as a whole. This is what Rav Ashlag wrote. It's from the end, it's in the end of the book Tapestry for the Soul, end of the introduction to the Zohar. Do not be surprised by the fact that an individual person, through his or her deeds, can cause an elevation or degradation of the whole world. There is an unalterable law that the macrocosm, the totality, and the microcosm, the individual, are as like to each other as 2 drops of water. The same procedures that occur with respect to the macrocosm occur with regard to the individual and vice versa. And furthermore, it is the individual components themselves which make up the macrocosm, and thus the macrocosm is only revealed through the manifestation of its individual components according to their measure and their quality. So certainly the acts of a single person, according to his or her capacity, may lower or elevate humanity as a whole. He goes on to say that the more people relate to the soul, the more the consciousness of a whole relates to the soul. It's because as individuals we are not relating to the soul enough. And I don't mean that we don't learn mysticism and stuff like that. What I mean is we don't fulfill the desire of the soul. It's true that the ego shouts when the soul whispers, but we need to start to listen to that still small voice. And the desire of the soul is one of giving in compassion and unconditionally to each other and to God. That's the desire of the soul. If the world just goes mad on materialism and consumerism, which is what it's doing right now, it's completely ignoring the desire of the soul, and therefore lowering the whole of humanity as a whole. But if we all work within ourselves on that basis of wanting the desire of the soul to be put into practice, the whole lot will go up. At present, our education systems, our political and economic systems, all put our basic nature first. But to change this around and base our systems on mutual giving in order to bring us into unity with the Creator is certainly within our power. But more than that, the current events have surely shown us that it's a stark necessity. If we ignore the rules of gravity and jump off a cliff, we endanger our lives. If we ignore the spiritual laws, we endanger ourselves and our communities to an equal extent. Rav Ashlag wrote, I think this is the last quotation. Okay, so we'll finish on time. We've said that nature obliges the human species to live a societal life. That's clear. So we have to consider the laws of nature that we are obliged to keep, looking at how they apply to the life of the community. In general, we find that we need to interact with the society in which we live, from the perspective of only two laws. We may define these two laws as receiving and giving benefit. That is, every member of society must receive his needs from society, and is also obliged to contribute to society through his work. If he does not obey these two fundamental rules, he definitely will suffer the consequences. Regarding the law that nature obliges us to receive from society, that's obvious. We don't need to consider this aspect to any great extent, because it's clear that failure to do so causes immediate harmful consequences. Therefore, no one neglects this. However, regarding the second rule, which is that of giving benefit to the society, the consequence of its neglect comes about in an indirect manner and is not immediately perceived. Thus, this rule is not kept properly, and humankind continues to simmer in the dreadful skillet of war, hunger, and their consequences, from which we suffer even now. The most amazing thing is that nature acts like a seasoned judge, punishing us precisely according to our development. All right? In the old days, when our development was very minimal, there were minimal consequences. Now, when our development is so great, the measure of affliction and suffering we undergo is much, much greater. We have here in our front of our eyes the basis for scientific evaluation. Divine providence has commanded us to fulfill the requirement of giving benefit to our fellow with all our might, so that none of us may lessen our work in bringing about the success and happiness of society. As long as we are lazy, not fulfilling our role to the required extent, nature will not cease to inflict the consequences on us and wreak its vengeance on us. We should be considering not only the blows we receive in our own time, but also those that hang as a drawn sword held over us in the future. We need to look to our children. The conclusion we're forced to come to is that nature will defeat us until ultimately we're compelled to unite to fulfill the mitzvot of the Creator in the measure that is asked of us. Rav Ashlag wrote this in about the 1950s, although I don't have a particular date, a definite date on this. I think it was in the 1950s. Could have been earlier though. It's amazing to me how totally accurate this is. It's so amazing. May God grant us the humility to listen, the willingness to learn, and the wisdom to choose our new way wisely. And to choose a new way, not just carry on in the same, stance, but to choose a new way. And I think if we take the coronavirus and the chaos and choose a new way, first of all for ourselves, and second of all within our own small circles, then gradually the biggest circles of all will also change positively. Okay.